There is a little book I want to put in your hands tonight. A diary, bound in worn cloth, the spine soft as an old glove from being opened so many times. The year written on the first page, in pencil and a careful slanting hand, is 1933, and the woman who kept it was a farm wife in Ohio, somewhere out past the last paved road, with 6 children sleeping under one roof and almost nothing in the way of money. I want to call her Mabel, because that was the kind of name a woman wore in those years, sturdy and warm, and because the truth is I am holding more than one diary here. I am holding 100 of them. Mabel is what we might call a composite, a portrait stitched together from many real women just like her, all across the farm country of this nation in the hardest winter of the Great Depression. I want to be honest with you about that right from the start. She is not one woman whose name I can prove. She is every one of them. And what she did day after day with 6 hungry mouths and a cellar and a garden and a few hens is the most astonishing piece of homemaking I have ever sat down to study. Because Mabel fed those 6 children on almost nothing, and by the time I am done, I want you to understand exactly how. So pour yourself a cup of coffee, find the chair you like best, the one that fits you, and settle in with me a good long while. Because we are going to walk straight through Mabel's year, from the frozen edge of January to the snows that closed it again, and I am going to show you the 10 things she did, the 10 plain methods that kept those children fed when the bank had failed and the crops sold for nothing and a dollar was as hard to come by as a warm day in February. I will say each one out loud as we come to it, so you never lose your place. And I will read you her own words along the way, the little lines she scratched into that diary by lamplight, because there is a whole life living in those lines if you know how to listen for it. And while you settle, do an old man a kindness. Tell me down in the comments where you grew up, and whether there was a garden behind the house, or a cellar under it, or a grandmother who could make a meal out of a wish and a handful of flour. I would dearly love to know. There is something about a hand-kept diary that holds a whole world in it. Now, I will tell you this right up front so you have something to carry in the back of your mind as we go. There is one entry near the end of Mabel's year, just one, written on a cold night in November, that stops my breath every time I read it. It is not the saddest entry, and it is not the proudest. It is something quieter and stronger than either, and when I read it to you near the end, I think you will understand at once why a woman like that could face a winter with 6 children and almost no money and never once, in 365 days, write down the word despair. Hold that thought. We will get there, but not yet. Let us begin where her year began, in the deep cold. Number 1. The garden, and everything she put up from it. Now, in January, the garden was nothing but a white rectangle of snow behind the house, but Mabel was already living off it, because the whole secret of that garden was not the summer, it was the winter. Back in the warm months she had grown everything that ground would give her, the beans and the peas, the tomatoes climbing their strings, the corn standing in rows taller than her children, the squash and the cucumbers and the cabbages big as a baby's head, and not one bit of it was eaten only in season. She canned. Lord, how she canned. There is an entry from the August before, and it reads, "Put up 41 quarts today. Hands stained, back aching, but the shelf is filling, and that is a comfort no money can buy. 41 quarts in a single day, in the heat of an Ohio August, with the stove roaring and the jars rattling in the boiling water bath. By the time the frost came, she had hundreds of jars lining the cellar wall, tomatoes and beans and corn and pickles and every berry the fence rows offered, all glowing red and gold and green in the dark like a treasure room. There were the bread and butter pickles the children loved, and the chow-chow made from the very last green tomatoes the frost would have claimed, and the apple butter cooked down all day in a copper kettle over a fire in the yard, stirred by the older children turn and turn about so it would not scorch. There was sauerkraut working in a crock in the corner, and jars of stewed tomatoes that would become 100 suppers, and the precious few jars of meat she put up when a hog was butchered, sealed under their own white fat. That was how 6 children ate vegetables in February, and meat besides, in a year when the store may as well have been on the moon for all the money there was to spend in it. The takeaway for you and me is plain, and it is powerful. The food is cheapest when it is in season, and a thing put up in summer costs almost nothing to eat in winter. You do not need a farm. A few tomato plants, a water bath canner, one hot Saturday in August, and you too can open a jar of summer in the dead of the year. Mabel knew that a full shelf was a kind of money in the bank, and the bank could not fail it. Number 2, the root cellar. Now this one folks have nearly forgotten altogether, and it breaks my heart a little because it was the quiet hero of that whole house. Down under the kitchen, dug into the cool earth, was a little room that never froze and never grew warm, that held the temperature of the deep ground all year round, and into that room Mabel laid down the harvest that did not need a jar at all. Potatoes by the bushel mounded in the dark, carrots and parsnips and turnips buried in boxes of sand so they kept crisp clear into spring. Cabbages hung by their roots from the rafters, onions braided into ropes, apples wrapped each one in a twist of newspaper so a single rotten one could not spoil its neighbors, squash lined up on a board like fat sleeping cats. She wrote one December evening, went down for potatoes by candle. The cellar smells of earth and apples. It is the smell of being safe. The smell of being safe. Think on that. That cellar was an icebox that ran on nothing, a pantry that needed no money, and it kept a family fed straight through the months when nothing at all grew outside. The takeaway is that cold and dark are free, and they will keep food for months if you let them. Maybe you have not got a cellar dug under your kitchen, but a cool closet, an unheated garage, a box on a north-facing porch. These can do the same humble work, and a sack of potatoes and a sack of onions and a few hard squash will keep for half a winter and cost you next to nothing. Number 3, the cow and the butter and the buttermilk. Mabel had one cow, a patient brown thing she called Bess, and that single cow was very nearly the difference between getting by and going hungry. Twice a day, before dawn and again at dusk, in the cold of the barn, Mabel or one of the older children sat on the stool and milked her, and that milk did the work of a grocery store all by itself. The children drank it fresh and warm. The cream rose to the top and was skimmed and churned, and there is an entry that says, "Churned till my arm gave out, but 2 pounds of butter to show for it. Gold as a buttercup, 2 pounds of butter from nothing but Bess and a strong arm." And here is the part the modern world forgets entirely. When the cream was gone for butter, what was left was buttermilk, and that buttermilk was not poured out. It made the biscuits rise tall and tender, it went into the pancakes and the cornbread, it soured the milk for baking, and what the family could not use, the pigs and the chickens drank down gladly. One cow fed 6 children, greased the skillet, raised the biscuits, and fattened the hogs. The takeaway for your kitchen, even with no cow in sight, is to stop letting things turn into trash before their time. Milk going sour is not ruined. It is buttermilk waiting to make the most tender pancake you ever ate. Nothing about Bess went to waste, and nothing in your refrigerator needs to either. Number 4, the hens and the eggs they laid. Out behind the house was a flock of hens, a dozen or so cheerful, scratching, foolish birds, and those hens were the steadiest little workers on the whole place. They turned kitchen scraps and bugs and weed seeds into eggs every single morning for the cost of almost nothing at all. The children gathered them warm from the straw, and the eggs did everything. Scrambled for breakfast, yes, but far more than that. An egg or two stretched a pound of meat into a meatloaf big enough for 8. Eggs bound the fritters and the croquettes that turned yesterday's leftovers into today's supper. Eggs made the noodles, rolled out thin on the floured table and cut by hand. Eggs made the custards and the cakes that turned an ordinary Sunday into a feast. Mabel wrote in March, "Hens slow in the cold, only 3 eggs, but spring is coming and they know it. And when the hens grew old and stopped laying, Well, they became the Sunday dinner, and even then they kept on giving. The takeaway is that a few hens, where you are allowed to keep them, will feed you eggs for the price of a little feed and a few scraps, and folks all over this country are putting coops back up in their yards this very year, rediscovering what Mabel never forgot. And even if you keep none, learn what she knew, that the humble egg is the cheapest way there is to stretch a little meat across a big table. Now let me stop right here for just a moment, because you have been so good to sit with me this far, and I want to say something plain. If these old ways are stirring something in you, if you find yourself nodding along thinking, yes, that is just how my people did it, then I would be proud to have you here with us from now on. Just tap that subscribe button, no fuss about it, and you will not miss the next story. We are a quiet bunch here, folks who remember, folks who believe the old wisdom was worth keeping. You belong with us. Now, back to Mabel and her year. Number 5. The bread she baked every blessed day. There was no store loaf in that house, not once, not ever. Mabel baked her own bread, and she baked it daily, because with 6 children a loaf did not last, and the flour came cheap in a great cloth sack, while a baker's loaf cost coins they did not have to spare. Before the sun was up, she had the dough rising in a crock by the warm stove, and by mid-morning the whole house was filled with that smell, that deep, warm, yeasty smell that is the smell of home itself, the smell that no candle and no spray can ever truly copy. She wrote one ordinary Tuesday, baked 5 loaves. The little ones stood at the oven door like puppies, gave them the heel with butter, and there was not a happier sound in Ohio than that chewing. 5 loaves, and the children waiting for the warm heel of it. That bread was breakfast with butter, dinner sopping up the gravy, supper toasted over the fire, and when at last it went stale it became bread pudding, or was dried for crumbs, or thickened the soup. And it was the bread, too, that went off to school in the morning, for those 6 children walked a good 2 miles to the schoolhouse with their dinner buckets, and inside each one was a thick slice of Mabel's bread spread with butter or lard or a smear of apple butter, and maybe a hard-boiled egg and an apple from the cellar wrapped in a twist of paper. There is an entry that says, "Packed 6 buckets before light. Not much in them, but enough." And they came home with the buckets empty and their cheeks red and their lessons learned. A mother cannot ask for more than that. Not much, but enough. The bread that fed them at home walked to school with them too, and kept them going through the long, cold day. The takeaway is one of the biggest savings there is. A loaf of bread baked at home costs less than $1 in flour and yeast, even now, even today, and the skill is not hard. It only wants a quiet afternoon and a little patience to learn. Mabel's hands knew it without thinking. Yours can too. Number 6. The way she stretched 1 chicken or a single ham across a whole week. This was Mabel's true art, the thing that separated a woman who got by from a woman who went hungry, and she was a master of it. When a chicken came to the table on Sunday, it was not a meal, it was the start of a campaign. Sunday the family ate the roasted bird, the good meat, the crisp skin, a feast. Monday the carcass and the scraps became a great pot of soup with noodles and whatever the cellar offered. Tuesday, what little meat was left was picked off and folded into a hash, or a pie under a crust, or creamed over toast. And the bones simmered all day into a broth that flavored the beans clear into Wednesday. 1 bird, 4 days. And a ham was the same, the meat first, then the bone thrown into the bean pot to give it soul, then the last fleck scraped for a breakfast scramble, and even the fat saved and rendered. Mabel wrote, 1 hen, and we ate of her Sunday through Thursday. Mother would be proud. Mother would be proud. The takeaway is as useful today as it was then, maybe more so. Buy the whole bird, never just the pieces in the foam tray. Learn to cook it once and eat from it 3 times. Save the bones, every one, for the broth holds the most flavor and the most nourishment of all. That single habit, making 1 good thing stretch across the week, will cut a grocery bill in half and fill a family besides. Number 7. The wild greens and the foraged food the land gave for free. When the long winter finally broke and the snow drew back off the fields, Mabel and the children went out with baskets, because the earth itself laid a table for those who knew where to look. There were dandelion greens, bitter and bright and bursting with the goodness a body craves after a winter of stored food. There was wild asparagus along the fence rows, and tender young lamb's quarters, and the curled fiddleheads down by the creek, and watercress in the cold running water. Later came the wild berries, blackberries that stained the children's hands and mouths purple, and elderberries for jelly, and the hickory nuts and black walnuts to gather in the fall and crack by the fire all winter, and the men brought home rabbit and squirrel and the fish from the pond, all of it free, all of it food. She wrote one April day, "First mess of dandelion greens. The children made faces, but I told them it is medicine, and they ate. Spring in the mouth at last. Spring in the mouth. The takeaway is gentle but true. The land still offers more than we remember, and while I would never send you out to eat a thing you cannot name for certain, there is real food growing free in the fence rows and the woods and even the edges of a yard, and learning to know a few safe wild greens connects you to the oldest grocery store there ever was, the one that never sends a bill. Now, we are past the halfway mark, you and I, and Mabel's year is turning toward summer. But remember, there is still that one entry waiting near the end, the one written on the cold November night, the one that stops my breath. We are getting closer to it. Keep it in your mind. Number 8. The trading and the bartering with the neighbors. No farm wife stood entirely alone, and Mabel least of all, because the whole countryside ran on a quiet web of trading that needed not $1 to turn. She had eggs to spare when the hens were laying strong, and the family down the road had a sow with piglets, and so a basket of eggs became a side of pork come fall. Her garden ran heavy with beans the year the neighbors failed, and so beans crossed the road one way and a sack of seed potatoes came back the other. When the threshing crews moved farm to farm, the women cooked together, great groaning tables of food, each bringing what she had, and no money changed hands at all. She wrote one September evening, traded a dozen eggs and a jar of pickles for the loan of their churn and a setting of better hens. Came out ahead, I think, and so did she. That is how it ought to be. Came out ahead, and so did she. That is the whole heart of it. The takeaway is one we have very nearly lost and dearly need back. Your neighbors have what you lack, and you have what they lack. And a community that trades and shares and helps is richer than any one family could ever be alone. A surplus of tomatoes from your garden, a skill you can teach, an afternoon of your help, these are coins that spend in a currency the bank knows nothing about. And let me pause here a second time, because we are deep in this together now. If Mabel's year is bringing back the smell of your own grandmother's kitchen, or the sight of a cellar shelf, or the sound of hens in a yard, then do me that small favor and subscribe, so we can sit down like this again real soon. There are not many places left that tell these old stories slow and kind. I would be glad to keep doing it, for you, one evening at a time. Now, let us go on, because Mabel still has work to do. Number 9. The sewing and the flour sack clothes. Now, feeding 6 children was not only about the food, it was about keeping them decent and warm besides, and a family with no money for the dry goods store had to make do, and Mabel made do better than anyone. The flour came in cloth sacks, and the companies, knowing full well what folks would do with them, had taken to printing those sacks in pretty patterns, calico and gingham and little flowers, so a woman could choose her flour by the dress it would someday make, and make dresses she did. Those flour sacks became the little girls' Sunday frocks, and the boys' shirts, and the dish towels, and the curtains, and the quilt pieces. Nothing wore out so badly it could not become something else. A man's worn shirt became a boy's shirt, then a girl's blouse, then a quilt square, then a rag, then at last a braided rug under the kitchen table. She wrote, Finished Ruthie's dress from the rose print sack tonight. She twirled in it by the lamp, and I have not seen her so proud. 11 cents of thread, and a happy child. 11 cents, and a happy child. The takeaway is not that you must sew your children's clothes, though it is a fine and saving skill if you care to learn it. The takeaway is the deeper habit underneath it, the refusal to see anything as trash while it still held the smallest use. A household that mends and remakes and uses a thing all the way to the end is always quietly richer than the one that throws away and buys new. Number 10. Making nothing, and I mean nothing, go to waste. This was the soul of the whole house, the thread that ran through all the rest, what the old folks called scrap cookery and what we might just call respect. In Mabel's kitchen there was no trash can full of food because there was no food that did not have a use. The bacon grease went into a tin on the back of the stove and fried the eggs and seasoned the beans all week. The stale bread became pudding or crumbs or thickening. The vegetable trimmings and the meat bones went into the stock pot that always simmered. The sour milk became biscuits. The bruised apple became sauce. The last scrapings of the jam jar were rinsed with hot water into a sweet drink for a child. The cheese rind flavored the soup. The water the potatoes boiled in went into the bread dough. The wood ash made the soap, and the soap scraps were melted into new bars, and the fat from the rendering went into that very soap. She wrote one frozen January night, the very depth of the year, made soup from what would have been thrown out, and the children said it was the best yet. There is no such thing as nothing, if you have eyes to see it. There is no such thing as nothing. The takeaway, the great final lesson Mabel leaves us, is to learn to see waste the way she saw it, as money walking out the door, as care thrown carelessly away. Once you start to see the bones that could be broth, the scraps that could be soup, the leftovers that could be lunch, you cannot stop seeing it, and your bill begins to shrink all on its own, and something better than money grows in its place, a kind of attention, a kind of gratitude for the plain daily gift of having enough. And now, here it is, the entry I told you to watch for, all the way back at the beginning. It is written on a cold November night near the end of her year, when the cellar was full and the hens had slowed and the snow was just beginning to fly again. And I want to read it to you slow, because every word in it was earned. She wrote, "Counted the jars today, and the potatoes, and the wood. We will make it through to spring. 6 children, and not one went to bed hungry this whole year, though the money never came. I do not know how we did it, except that we did. Tucked them in tonight, all 6 warm, under the quilts I made, and stood in the door a while just listening to them breathe. We have so little, and I have never in my life felt so rich. We have so little, and I have never felt so rich." That is the entry. That is the one that stops my breath. Because do you see what she is telling us across all these years? She is not telling us she got by. She is telling us that in the very hardest winter this country has ever known, with no money at all and 6 mouths to feed, she found at her own kitchen table a wealth that had nothing whatsoever to do with dollars. The full cellar she had filled with her own hands, the bread she had baked, the children fed and warm and breathing soft in the dark. That was her fortune, and no bank could fail it, and no depression could take it from her, because she had made every bit of it herself. That is why I wanted you to wait for it, because the 10 methods are the how, and they matter, and I hope you carry every one of them into your own kitchen tomorrow. But that November entry is the why. It is the secret underneath all the rest. Mabel did not feed 6 children on almost nothing because she was lucky, or because times were simpler, or because she had no choice. She did it because she understood a thing we have very nearly forgotten, that a household is not made rich by how much it brings in, but by how little it lets slip away, and by how much care it pours into what little it has. So let me gather it back up for you, all 10, the way she might have ticked them off on her own work-worn fingers, the garden, and everything she canned from it. The root cellar, cold and dark and free. The cow, and the butter, and the buttermilk. The hens, and the eggs that stretched the meat. The bread baked fresh every single day. The one chicken made to last a week. The wild greens the land gave for free. The trading and bartering with the neighbors. The sewing and the flour sack dresses, and making nothing at all go to waste. 10 plain methods, and not one of them is beyond you. Not one needs a farm, or a fortune, or a finer time than this one. They need only what Mabel had, which was attention and care and the refusal to let anything good slip carelessly through her fingers. You know, I have sat a long time with that little cloth-bound diary, and with the woman behind it, the woman I have called Mabel, though she had 100 names. I can see her so plain. At the kitchen table in the lamplight, the children asleep upstairs, her hands rough and her back tired, writing down the small accounting of her day, the jars counted, the potatoes mounded in the cellar. The dress finished, the soup made from nothing, the eggs traded for the better hens. I can see her standing in the doorway listening to 6 children breathe in the cold, and feeling, against all the arithmetic of that terrible year, rich. And I think the thing she would most want me to tell you, if she could reach across all these years and lay her hand on yours, is that the wealth she found is still there for the finding. It did not die with her generation. It is only waiting, like a jar of summer down on a cellar shelf, for us to remember it is there and bring it back up into the light. We have more than she ever dreamed of, you and I. More food, more comfort, more ease than any people in the history of the world. And yet so many of us feel poorer than that woman in that drafty farmhouse ever felt, eating alone and in a hurry out of a package in front of a screen. She had so much less, and in the ways that matter she had so much more, and the bridge between her world and ours is not money, it is care. It is the willingness to bake the bread, and fill the jar, and save the bone, and trade with the neighbor, and gather the children to a table made by hand. Every one of those 10 methods is a way of pouring care back into your own days, and the dividend it pays is the very richness Mabel wrote about on that cold November night. So here is what I would love from you tonight before you go. Down in the comments below, tell me one thing your mother or your grandmother did to feed a family on almost nothing. One trick, one habit, one meal she could pull out of an empty cupboard that you have never forgotten. The way she stretched a chicken, the jars on her cellar shelf, the dress she sewed from a flour sack, the soup she made from what others would have thrown away. Share it, because somebody reading tonight needs to hear it, and together we can keep these old skills from slipping away for good. I read every single one, and I treasure them more than I can say. And if you have enjoyed sitting with me and with Mabel through this long, hard, wonderful year, if it brought back the smell of bread or the cool earth smell of a cellar or the sound of hens in the yard, then do an old fellow a kindness and subscribe so we can do this again before long. Next time, I want to take you down into one of those cellars in the dead of January and show you exactly how a family kept a whole winter's worth of food without a single icebox or $1 of electricity and never lost a bite of it to spoiling. You will not want to miss that one. We will keep the old wisdom alive together, you and I, one quiet story at a time. So pour yourself one more cup, hold your people a little closer tonight, and remember what Mabel knew in the hardest winter of all, that the richest things in this life were never the ones with a price tag on them. Take good care of yourself, and I will see you next time.